Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Rassilon, Omega, and that other guy. Unfortunately, the other guy will not be able to join us because he's off fixing the mess that he made of history. But we will continue on talking about all things Time Lord and reviewing, in this particular case, reviewing some of the better stories that have come out of Doctor Who from all different media forms. In this particular issue of great moments from Doctor Who, we will be taking a look at A Storm of Angels, the unbound audio adventure from Big Finish. I guess there's a tad bit of news we can cover before we dive into that. BBC has confirmed that Power of the Doctor will air on Saturday, October 23rd.
Yep.
Sunday. Yeah.
Sunday.
Yes, it says Sunday in my notes, but I just read it as Saturday. Apparently, I'm really eager for it. I'm going to try to use my unconscious manipulation of the crystallization of history to try to shift these things, and have the power of psychosynthesis. But yes, Sunday, October 23rd. We will probably be taking a look at that. When it comes out. Did you have any news to report?
No. Well, actually, it premiered this weekend in the UK, and so a couple of luminaries and press people got to see it. So I'm getting excited.
Yeah, no, I did see something about that. I haven't seen any spoilers out yet, but
people are behaving themselves. And Shudigatwa said that Russell T Davies gave him some Doctor Who episodes to watch.
Yes.
Did you see that one?
No, I had not. So you dug up some more news than I've got. So, well, cool. I do think it's worth coming up with your idea for how you're going to play the Doctor and practicing it a bit, but then you should probably go off and take a look at a sampling of some of the other Doctors just to see if there's ideas. That's generally my rule for most creative endeavors is do your best to come up with what you want to do and then go out and do your research and see how that will add, complement, or enrich what you have already come up with, rather than starting with research. I think that's a mistake that leads to too much continuity obsessing in your story, and so you turn into somebody like me who just obsesses about continuity all the time. Fortunately, BBC's not letting me tell any Doctor Who stories, so I don't have to worry about the continuity overload that would happen if I was to get my hands on the shows.
Do you want to know which episodes he gave him?
Oh, sure, if you know that.
Yes, I do, actually.
Okay.
So he gave him, here we go, I have it up over here. So far, I've watched the Sontaran Experiment, Time Lash, and Blink. Those are the three he says he's watched. We don't have the whole list. But
Time Lash?
I don't know Time Lash, so...
Time Lash is generally like in the bottom 10 of all of Doctor Who TV stories anytime you do a poll.
Oh, wow.
It is just absurdly bad. I mean, you can absolutely watch it as a so bad it's good, but I guess if you were to preface it with "don't do this" and then watch Time Lash, this is what happens when Doctor Who is done badly. Then watch Time Lash. I guess if you had that context. But Time Lash.
Time Lash.
That's wow. Okay. Sontaran Experiment is an interesting choice just because it's not hated or anything. It's just considered kind of a story most people don't talk about much. It's kind of like neither not offensively bad or commendably good. It's just kind of there. So what was the third one you mentioned?
Oh, I closed the screen.
You just said it. What was it? It was.
Hold on, I got you. I gotcha. Where was it? Oh, here we go. Let's see here. Come on. Come on, Twitter. Twitter load. It was the Sontaran experiment.
No, Sontaran experiment and
Blink.
Blink.
And Blink.
Okay,
yes.
Blink.
A Moffat story.
Blink is an amazing piece of Doctor Who that doesn't really have the Doctor in it. But I guess it's a decent primer for how time travel works in Doctor Who. So
time travel and causality.
Yeah, causality. That's kind of that's a better word for it. You're right. So I can see, I guess, as an education on the science fictional rules of Doctor Who, Blink is a decent primer for that. It's not going to give you a whole lot about what it's like to be the Doctor or what a standard Doctor Who adventure looks like.
Right.
But Blink is excellent. I mean, you should just watch Blink on general principle. I have people who hate Doctor Who, but still I showed them Blink and they were like, okay, that was amazing.
It's pretty cool. It's a really good twist.
So, all right. Well, do you have any other surprising news that you've clearly out-newsed me by a vast margin?
Hey, I got to have some job, right?
Okay. Well, good
Team
job.
TARDIS.
No, excellent. So, just making sure.
By the way, the Family Jewels of Rassilon is quite a quite a good name.
Well, there's lots of jewels in this story.
Indeed.
Also, according to one of the script editors of Doctor Who, Susan is in fact the distant descendant of Rassilon. So, kind of works.
It does indeed.
Let's see. Regarding episodes, I learned relatively recently while reading TARDIS Parallael Volume 2 that apparently the Tomb of the Cybermen was pivotal in helping Matt Smith nail down how he wanted his Doctor to act. He considered that to be absolutely amazing and gushed on about it in an interview or two.
Second Doctor,
yes.
The other bow tie wearing.
Yes, it might be why the bow tie's there is because he liked that episode so much.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because as I recall, Matt Smith largely did his own costume. That they were having trouble coming up with something, and he just kind of said, "Well, how about this?" And they said, "Well, yeah, sure, why not?" So that's my kind of recollection of that story.
It's very professorial, that first, like hip, young, straight out of college into the academic world professor, you know.
And while I'm mentioning it, TARDIS Parallael is a series of books reviewing the sociological context and messages of classic Who and new. Well, I think they've only got the classic Who books out. There are new Who books coming as well, reviewing each episode and placing them in their proper cultural context for the time that they were released. And they are absolutely, utterly fantastic. Just great little light reading. You'd sit down and read. And if you want a sampler, go to TARDIS Parallael, the blog, where the shortened version of all of the entries are there, including New Who. So you can take and read a few and see if you'd like to pick up a whole book filled with this stuff.
Oh, very cool.
Very good. I've become totally addicted to it. Oh, excuse me, presidential cat.
Presidential cat.
Yes. This is one of the incarnations of the presidential
Look at that.
cat.
Cutie patootie. I'm partial to orange cats because, as you know, my presidential cat is orange as well.
Ah, yes, but yours hasn't broken the first law of time. So, mine has, and keeps doing it. All right. Well, let's take a look at A Storm of Angels.
Yes.
So, you have the cover handy in slightly more detail than what I've got it here.
Yes, here we go.
All right, there we go. So this is another one of the Unbound series, which is, if you've seen Marvel's What If or read Marvel's What If, then you know exactly what the Doctor Who Unbound series is. It's what ifs for Doctor Who done by the people by Big Finish in audio drama format. And this one came out in January of 2005 AD in the Humanian era. So very shortly before New Who premiered. This was some of the last of the Wilderness Years Who to come out before suddenly it was all about New Who. And everyone was like, Tom Baker who? So yes, this also was written by Mark Platt, who was one of the script writers for Doctor Who in the final years of the classic era in the 80s, and wrote several novels as well in the Wilderness years, and was the person who wrote the part 1 of this story, Old Mortality, which we reviewed for our first episode in this podcast. So this one is the John Barr hinge, the deviation in history. To some degree, the deviation in history is just what if the Doctor never left Gallifrey, because it's continuation of the previous Unbound what if thing. But since that audio ends with the Doctor finally leaving, this story focuses on what if the Doctor really did change history as he traveled through time and space. What if he was much more, I don't know, maybe careless is the right word?
Cavalier, gallant.
Cavalier, yeah, cavalier, gallant. Yes. For example, in 1480, he takes Leonardo da Vinci into outer space and shows him various ways to travel through space. Mia. And then in 1508, Vasco da Gama takes a spaceship designed by Leonardo da Vinci and flies to Mars. And 1585, Francis Drake begins charting the asteroid belt that lies beyond Mars. So yes, everything gets wildly changed because of the Da Vinci thing. And that's not just the only change he's made. He's made lots of them, but that's the one that kind of drives the alternate what if of the world of Earth, of Sol 3 when we get there. And so that's what we have for Storm of Angels. And I guess one thing I should say is, despite what my t-shirt says about Don't Blink, it's not those angels. No. It's different angels. These angels are aliens made of living stone that infect people who gaze upon them and turn them into stone. That really doesn't clarify anything. You don't want to look at these aliens. You don't want to look at these angels. Don't look at the angels. It's best to keep your eyes averted from anything related to the angels in this story, because they're very different critters. I mean, aside from the whole stone and converting people into stone. Anyway, they're different. Just trust me.
Just don't look too long. That's all. Yes. You can blink. You just can't stare.
Yes. You can blink. Just don't stare. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Dr. D, will you spin us some summary?
I shall. So, in an alternate timeline, the Doctor and Susan are really enjoying their freedom, but Susan keeps growing weaker. Now, temporal agent Zero is on his tail for the alterations they've made in history. Oh, alteration.
Sorry. I should say I wrote this, so if I put the wrong word in, it's my fault, not his.
But also, Dr. D, sometimes, sometimes I've been inhaling those fumes, I guess, from the volcanoes or whatever to see the angels. The alterations they've made in history. They arrive on Sir Francis Drake's spaceship, which is laden with jewels mined from the asteroid belt. But the jewels begin infecting the Time Lord Zero and then all of Queen Elizabeth I's court. Disguised as angels, the solar system's own asteroid belt surrounds the Earth, ready for invasion. Things take another turn when President Susan appears, intent on apprehending the Doctor. It is revealed that the Susan the Doctor has been traveling with is a simulacrum created by his possibility generator. The Doctor disables the jewel creature's mother stone using a mirror created by the TARDIS, and then uses the mother stone to lead the asteroid belt of jewels out into space. The dying possibility Susan swaps places with the original one with the simulacrum going to serve as Lady President on Gallifrey, while the other continues to travel with the Doctor. Nice little tidy end there.
Yes. Yes. So yes, thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Yes, the space-time coordinates for this story: the spaceship Golden Hind and the space station Nonsuch Palace in orbit of Earth. The year is 1588 AD in the Humanian era, and it's probably, from the Doctor's point of view, about 150 years after Old Mortality, given one of the things that Susan says. So she says that she spent her entire presidential term trying to cover up and clean up the Doctor's messes as he was changing history. And a presidential term, if I recall correctly, is about 150 years on Gallifrey. So,
nice, clever.
So yes, using some information from the novel Ancestor Cell, we were able to make something of a guess that actually a large amount of time has passed for the Doctor. And they do hint that there's been lots and lots of adventures going on. I don't know if I would have if the author was necessarily thinking 150 years worth of adventures, but there were certainly a lot. There was one sequel to this, one more sequel, which we will not be covering, a short story titled The Innocents, that was published in a Doctor Who anthology, and it takes place in this timeline and deals with these characters. But other than that, that was the end for this particular Unbound line, and I think Baladon has passed on, right?
I forget.
I did it again.
I forget if Baildon. Yeah, Baildon. Yes. I forget if he passed it. I know we looked it up. Terrible memories these Time Lords have here.
Well, it's been 150 years for us too. It doesn't. I mean, it may seem like 3 weeks to you, but it's
right. Yes.
150 years for us. Yes. Look, I mean, Sohail's regenerated. He's got this nice new face.
Beard's gone.
Yes, and whereas I'm wearing the exact same shirt I was wearing at the end of last podcast after the time slip, but don't read too much into that.
Yeah, this might happen again sometime. You never know.
Well, I have a significant amount, but non-infinite number of Doctor Who t-shirts, so you'll probably see some repeats. So. Again, there's not a lot of visuals to go with an audio drama, but I did dig up a bit of fan art. I was also wondering if Dr. D could see if his AI generator could make some gemstone-filled people.
Here we go.
With his little AI generator. Okay, so here we have from Mega Plumfinity, a alternate CD cover with some pretty fancy photoshopping there, and a image of Sir Francis Drake's steam-powered spaceship.
Very cool.
And I quite like that. We're really leaning into the Baildon is the first Doctor thing there by photoshopping him onto the first Doctor's body, which I think is fair enough. I kind of feel like that this is really that's certainly how he's playing him. Let's put it that way.
By the way, Jeffrey Baildon did pass on May 10th, 2017.
2017.
So, yeah, and May 10th is the day before my birthday, so at least he didn't die on my birthday. I can mourn for him the day before my birthday, so that's good.
So let's take a look at the next one. Here's another one. This one is by Morgan Holden again, and I think we've got John D there being filled with jewels or gemstones, and a different version of Sir Francis Drake's ship. And again, we're not quite going full Hartnell there with the Doctor, but just kind of gesturing in that direction, but still kind of having him do his own thing. Whereas Susan's stripy top is absolutely a callback to an outfit that she wore in the TV show back in the day.
I like this one. I can imagine with today's CG technology, being so ubiquitous on television and so pretty decent looking, you could pull off a nice crystallized Dr. D there.
Yeah. No, it would be expensive, so you wouldn't be able to show up much.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I kind of like the idea of the
Well, no, they did those glass people in the 12th Doctor era. Remember when the ones that resurrect Bill?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So maybe, I don't know.
It's doable. It's just how much on-screen time can you afford?
The tough part is adding the beard to the crystal face. Let me tell you, that's gonna be.
I have to admit, when I was listening to it this time, I was thinking more of gemstone zombies. So I kind of had like kind of doing the zombie, the body is starting to decay and fall apart, but also instead of rotting stuff appearing and bones sticking out, it was all these brilliant gemstones sticking out of the eyes and like in the mouth, and the skin might be starting to rip open with a jewel sticking out, which is kind of what they did with Swarm, and they were both Ravengers. They had crystals sticking out of them.
Right. Oh.
So, that would be both really disturbing to look at, but also since there's no blood or guts or anything or rotting flesh, you would still be able to get away with it on Doctor Who for children television. So, because it's just gemstones and that's not all that scary, but it still would be scary because it's just wrong. All right. I think we have one more.
Yes, here we go. Voila.
Yes. And this one is another one by Nick Ferrazza. Again, we're leaning into the Hartnell. In fact, I think, is that the same Hartnell body?
I think it is actually the same Hartnell body. Yes.
the same picture. So, and we have a very statuesque looking angel there. You have the barrel in this one. Instead of putting on Sir Francis Drake's ship, they put on the Doctor's ship. That he shows up in a barrel, and they're all like, "Hey, we pulled this barrel up! Quick, get a tap! Let's see what it's filled with." And they're like, "Oh, sweet and sour in the same flagon." All right. Well, yes. Which is your favorite?
I think I would say this one's my favorite.
This one,
right here. Yeah. It just has like a cool, like you said, lots of photoshopping, but I think that's my favorite version of the Golden Hind.
Ah, yes. It is good. So yeah, that might be my favorite. It's certainly one of the first two. I think. I don't know. I kind of like the coldness of the second one, but
they're all good though. Compliments to all these.
Yes, they're all good. So thank you for providing us with some visual art for our audio-only story that we're reviewing. So again, we have Jeffrey Belden and Carol Ann Ford is the stars. And we've got the Doctor up. What you got a picture for him, I think?
I do indeed. Let's see here. Here we go.
There we go. So, any thoughts on the Doctor from this thing? Observations, comments?
I liked him better in this story than the previous one. I just thought the performance, I guess they warmed up a little more and were a little bit, I think they were a little bit more, the voice work sounded more natural, I guess, or more doctory. I guess he fell into his role a little bit better,
All right.
Yeah, so I like that. I love the introduction of Zero. I loved all the time stuff. I like we'll go over it later, but I like all the thing that we're going to talk about during the TARDIS feature today.
Oh.
And I have to say, while I was listening to it, I'm like chilling out. I'm listening. I'm trying not to do anything else because I can't do more than one thing at a time. I'm not like some folks who can multitask. So I'm just like chilling and listening. And then when Elizabeth, the first started speaking, I could have sworn that was Dame Judi Dench. The actor, I can't remember her name at the moment. I looked it up, but the actor is a spot-on dead ringer for Dame Judi Dench, who has played Queen Elizabeth I, as you know.
Yeah, well, she definitely would have made it on the cover of the CD if they gotten her.
Had they gotten her. And then I didn't know this, but apparently there were calls for her to play the Doctor at some point, and she thought it was ridiculous. She, I don't know why people want me to play the Doctor. So I hate to say that whenever, like, kudos to the actor who played the part of Queen Elizabeth, but you have a very uncanny voice resemblance to the name Judi Dench. Let's just put it that way.
Let's see, who was that? Kate Brown.
Kate Brown, thank you. Yes, so kudos to Kate Brown. I actually got to look her up and see what she did anything different for her voice in this.
All right. Let's see here. Lost the tab. There it is. Okay.
Unless Kate Brown is like Judi Dench's like nom de plume that she. I didn't get paid for that Doctor Who gig, so yeah.
I mean, there are cases of people like, what's his name? James Bond was a stormtrooper in one of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies.
Right.
And, so, those things do happen, but I would think she'd want to show up in on-screen Doctor Who, not an audio drama, though I guess this was probably recorded several months earlier, but I'm sure by then they'd announced that there was going to be a new Doctor Who. So, and I'm sure a phone call to Russell T Davies would have made everything happen. He was putting rock stars on that show.
She was also, she's in a bunch of audios though. She does, I just looked her up right now, and Kate Brown appears in Doctor Who's Necromantia, Urgent Calls, The Plague Herds of Excellus, and then Cuddlesome, and then of course this one.
Yeah, no, Big Finish has a certain repertoire of people that they would often call upon to fill out their casts. All right, I think you're right. I think the thing I noticed is that the Doctor and Susan had much better chemistry in this story. Mm-hmm. But then they're supposed to be this getting along like a house on fire up until the 4th episode when we find out that one of them's fake or something.
Right.
So one of them is a holographic Moriarty. But
crossing streams there.
Yes. Hey, Doctor Who can cross over with Star Trek. It's just
true.
Star Trek that can't cross over with Doctor
Who. Apparently, that's true.
As we discussed in an earlier episode. So yeah, I thought they worked just wonderfully together, and it's kind of like one of the reviewers I was reading pointed out that at the time it was considered Big Finish was considering it blasphemous to recast a role, any of the Doctors or the companions, no recasting at the time that this story came out. Now there have been more deaths. And they've discovered that and Stephen Moffat recast the first Doctor, and so there's been a whole lot more recasting on Big Finish, and they're much more open to the idea. I feel very confident that if this had come out now, they just would have said, "Hey, why don't you be our first Doctor?" Because I think he might arguably does a better job than David Bradley as far as catching the voice and the vocal mannerisms. He does it's debatable whether he looks like the first Doctor, but it's an audio drama. So,
what was it? The 5 Doctors had a different Doctor, right? Like,
yes,
yeah. So. Well, there's also the famous mannequin or whatever.
Oh, yes. Stock footage, Tom Baker. But yes. Anyway, so yeah, they made a point that if this story came out today, they'd probably just would have had him be their first Doctor, and that probably is right. That's probably true. I guess I don't know how much money he was demanding for these show ups, but it apparently wasn't so much they weren't willing to do a sequel. They were up for a sequel. So, anyway, yeah, they work better. And I think some of that's intentional. They're supposed to be antagonistic, like really not comfortable with each other in the first story. Whereas here they've been traveling for apparently 150 years. So they've fallen into a groove. And that works well. It was also kind of nice to get to see Susan being the romance option. I mean, you could say, well, okay, she's a girl, so of course somebody has to fall in love with her. But in her run, people were generally falling in love with Barbara. And Susan never got to do that. So it's kind of nice to see that Susan got to do something a little different, that in her original run on the show would have almost always been Barbara is the one that gets the guys paying attention. So so that was amusing to see. Sorry, that was another incarnation of the presidential cat there.
Oh, those cats are regenerating constantly.
No, they're just breaking the first law of time. They're all here at the same time. It's just terrible here. Constant violations. Cat is a cat who walks through time and goes where he pleases, or she pleases. That kind of changes from incarnation to incarnation. So, when did you figure out the Susan twist?
I guess I figured it out when President Susan arrived.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that's when I figured it out too, the first time I listened to this, but that was back in 2005. So it's a little fuzzy now, but I certainly remembered it when I was listening to it. So, but we do get to find out what happened, because the end of Old Mortality is uncertain as to whether Susan goes with the Doctor or not. We find out as the answer is, does Susan go with the Doctor? The answer is yes. No, we mean no.
Yes. No, we mean no.
And what did you think of the answer to the Susan question of what was making her ill and all of that? Did the twist seem cool, or were you like, well, that's...
Yeah, no, it did seem cool. And also, like, the solution of how to get Susan back on the TARDIS was really cool, to send the dying Susan back to Gallifrey. So that was interesting. It had a bit of the what's that famous Dumas? Is it Dumas? The Man in the Iron Mask, but without all the prison stuff.
I suppose you're right.
Or the Iron Mask, for that matter.
Yeah, it does. Iron Man with the Iron Mask kind of verves with this historical tones and stuff. Yeah, doesn't it? Good call. So,
yeah,
yes,
I liked it. I really thought that was clever. It's kind of like, it's kind of something that I didn't expect necessarily. I mean, I started to figure it out as as it was happening, but yeah, it was cool. It was a good story point.
Yeah, just when you think you've got everything figured out, we get a whole big twist in the last episode.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, and I thought, again, Carol Ann Ford is doing some of her best Susan work that she ever does. Even in other Big Finish audio, she's often being asked to play the 16-year-old Susan, and in most of them. And so that still kind of limits her trying to recapture that, rather than just being able to play a more mature, experienced, savvy version of that. And so, yeah, I wish we could have gotten to see more of this. We do get to see a mature Susan in the Susan's War audio dramas, where Susan joins the Time War.
Right, and actually, this is something I've been wanting on live action for a while, so it was nice to get it in this audio drama, is to get a more, the update, the Susan update, if you will.
Yeah, I still feel like, I mean, if the 60th anniversary special doesn't have Susan coming back, they're doing it wrong. But I felt that kind of about the 50th too.
It's like, I feel like it's like one of the most asked for things. Like every time there's like a who's coming back, Rassilon's. Oh, is Susan coming? I always hear about it. People want Susan. It's just
but but unlike some of the other people you could bring back, where you're like, okay, it's been quite a few years. Is the actor still up to gallivanting around on sets and memorizing lines? Carol Ann or Susan is a Time Lord. You can regenerate her into a new
Right,
actor.
a new actor. It's true.
Yeah, so you don't have to. You can have your cake and eat it too, and nobody's going to call foul on that in the way that they would if you brought back a look-alike to play the Brigadier.
Right, exactly.
So. I mean, outside of cyber armor, of course, which some people still called foul on that. But
well, yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, then we have Zero/Moses, the when he becomes a gemstone zombie. What did you think of him?
I dug it. I like the performance by the voice actor, sorry again, I looked it up, but I forgot. But I like the performance. I like he was very snooty. He was very Time Lord, uppity, and I like that he was like chasing the doctor, assigned to him. It was good. It was really good. I like that whole thing where he gets shot back. What is it? Shot way into the future. So whatever the doctor did, it would have shot him in the opposite direction, I guess. And then he had to like make his way back, and like it was crazy. Yeah, it was really cool.
Ian Hallard.
Thank you, Ian Hallard. Yeah, he was good. He was really good.
Yeah, he was fun. I could have swore they brought him back in the Prime timeline someplace in Big Finish, but when I went poking around on the TARDIS Wikipedia, I couldn't find anything, so I guess I imagined it.
Causality must have changed something.
Yeah, somebody went back and removed him.
But I also liked the idea of a new Time Lord adversary for the Doctor, or antagonist, rather than bringing back the same old. Like Zero's new, as far as I could.
As far as I can tell, according to TARDIS Wikipedia, the Zero's only in this story. So like I said, I could have swore the Prime timeline Zero showed up and harassed the Fifth Doctor or something, but apparently I'm wrong. So. But
it also makes sense that the Time Lords would send someone after a renegade Time Lord, which I'm surprised we don't see much more of.
There's this
in modern
hint. There's this little hint that apparently, if you know the TARDIS, a TARDIS's signature code.
Oh, they explain that. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
They don't really explain why in the Prime timeline they don't know it, but it could be that we do know that the Doctor deliberately doesn't form a proper symbiotic link with his TARDIS. In the Hartnell Doctor doesn't, so that to make it harder for the Time Lords to track him through space and time. So it could be that the symbiotic imprint imprints the signature code or something on space time everywhere the TARDIS goes or something. And so if you change the code of the it's some sort of combo code between the Time Lord's genetic symbiotic nuclei code and the TARDIS's signature codes to get dematerialization codes fit together and create the signature code. And of course, one asks, well, why did the Doctor just change the signature code? We can always answer, well, he didn't do very good at TARDIS training course. Maybe he didn't know that was a problem. Another comment is the person who does change the signature code is Lady President of Gallifrey. It might be that she has some admin access to all TARDISes.
I would imagine
the master password.
Yeah. I would imagine that those privileges exist for the president. It kind of makes sense. But I was also thinking, Brian, that like the TARDIS itself may have the ability to do things that are beyond what the Time Lords know they can do. So who knows? Like maybe the TARDIS can mask itself.
Yes, there is a couple of stories, short stories usually, not all of them licensed by the BBC, that indicate that the time ships, even the time ships in the classic era, the TARDISes in the classic era, are significantly more sapient and thoughtful, and certainly the Doctor's wife story with Matt Smith in it, and Idris seems to point to it, that the idea that there's a lot more going on in those TARDIS brains than you might think. When I was younger, I used to think of the TARDIS as kind of like as like a pet, like a dog or something. It's alive and it's kind of intelligent, and you can teach it tricks, and it'll try to, if you get into trouble, it might even try to help you, or go for help or something. But there's a limit to the communications, whereas it now seems more like the problem is just the communications framework is so different that it's not that the TARDIS is dumber than a Time Lord. It's just that the TARDIS is different than a Time Lord on such a fundamental scale that they can't communicate with each other in any but the most rudimentary forms. And it's not, it's just their viewpoint on the universe doesn't necessarily make sense to each other.
It's like trying to fit all of time and space into a little tiny, kind
Blue
of
box.
Yes. As intelligent as Time Lords are, and as amazing as their technology and their biological technology and their brain capacities must be, and all that stuff, like, I can only imagine that all of time and space is much bigger. But the Doctor does always say, I've got all of time and space floating around in my head.
Yeah. Well, yes, there have been hints that the infinity of the TARDIS and the infinity of the Time Lord mind are somehow connected.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that I'm pretty sure the Time Lord brain, when we get to see one, wouldn't actually fit in a humanoid skull. So the hints in the novels that Time Lord skulls might be dimensionally transcendental and to fit bigger brains, albeit they're not wildly bigger than a human brain. But, I think the prop department just wanted it big enough they could shove green and yellow lights in it. But but the thing is that ended up being bigger than it probably should be. So,
well, it would make sense if they have time, if they have bigger on the inside technology, it can translate probably to biological bigger on the inside as well, especially after interfacing with these trans-dimensional beings, for so long, the TARDIS is.
Yes. It also means if you're faction paradox and you're really careful, you can cut up a Time Lord skull in the right way and wear it as a hat because it's bigger on the inside.
And if you're not careful, you get stuck in it like if a giant dome fell on you.
Yes. Yes. During the Time War, the Time Lords started booby-trapping their skulls just to prevent these sort of shenanigans from faction paradox. I made that up, by the way. There's a lot of weird... I'm not saying faction paradox would, or the Time Lords wouldn't do that, but as far as I know, they never did that. So. They did have other types of booby traps that would self-destruct the brain, but to prevent information from falling into the wrong hands. All right. Well, let's. What about our historical personages? Sir Francis Drake, Dr. John Dee, and Elizabeth I.
Well, I expected to see all of them. As soon as I heard Sir Francis Drake, I was like, "Oh, are we gonna see Queen Elizabeth? Are we gonna see Dr. Dee?" So
you know who Dr. Dee is. I was vaguely aware that the name rings a bell, but I was like, I kind of meant to do some research on the actual people, but I just didn't get around to it. So,
well, yeah, remember when those? I remember John Dee being mentioned in history class, but I don't think we spent too much time on him. But when the films came out with Cate Blanchett playing Elizabeth, I think it's either in the first film, she goes and sees Dr. Dee, and I thought, wow, what a weird, cool name for a person, Dr. Dee. And I think in the film they portrayed him as like perhaps more as an astrologer, and I guess he was probably more of an astrologist, I guess. Is that the right word? Or yeah. Which they talk about, by the way. I love the Doctor's little quib at him. Yeah. Oh, except all that astrology stuff. So I actually then went back and remember reading more about him, and he was an interesting figure. But yeah, what a cool. I mean, I feel like it's a very. That's the other thing I really loved about this is it's a period of history that I really like. So it was cool to kind of see a a timed up, like a what if version of it, rather, I should say.
Yes, yes. What if 1588 but steampunk?
Yeah, and which I gotta say, like I that was very appealing, like because like I guess 2005 would have been around the time steampunk was still pretty big. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like steampunk's always been big, but yeah.
Yeah. I always feel bad that the time when steampunk was at its biggest was when Doctor Who was at its most textual, and so much of steampunk is the visual design. So the big chance to do the Doctor Who steampunk story would have been like in the late 90s or something. And there was only novels happening at that point.
Yeah.
And again, there eventually there were the audios, and they have actually done some steampunk audios. But again, so much of steampunk is the look that just putting some steam engine sound in the background doesn't really
cut it.
Yeah, it's the look. And so I'm hoping that maybe Russell T Davies will bring us a full-on Doctor Who goes full steampunk for a story. That
It would be really nice. I think the closest we got was the 11th Doctor fiddling around in the underbelly of the control console with those goggles and things like that. That kind of gave me a little bit of a steampunky flavor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember being delighted at those images.
Yeah, you can kind of see the some lingering echoes of steampunk in the TARDIS design from both the Christopher Eccleston and the early Matt Smith one.
That's right.
Just some little bits of echoes, and even there's even a little bit of the Jules Verne Nautilus going on with the Peter Capaldi TARDIS control room. So. And I guess there are actual pipes with valves running around on top of the crystals in Jodie Whittaker's TARDIS, but
I got to pay a little bit more attention. I didn't know
they're really thin little pipes with little like faucet valve things.
Very cool.
So yes, I am a bit of a Philistine and don't know much about real history. So I'm vaguely, I do know a little bit about Sir Francis Drake because my grandmother on my dad's side used to say that we were related to him somehow or other, and I never followed up to find out if that's actually true. But as a kid, it kind of captured my imagination for a few months. And I was reading stuff up on him and stuff, and had a vague obsession with dragons because he was Drake the Dragon. As a privateer, and I'm pretty sure John Dee gets mentioned. The Prime Timeline version gets mentioned in some of the Faction Paradox stuff, but obviously Elizabeth I has shown up just flat out in Doctor Who on TV in the Prime Timeline.
What is she her entrance? She hovers down in this like glass thing.
Yeah, she's got a big glass booth throne thing that lowers down on cables. And the Doctor's like, "Oh wow, this is even more impressive than the Panopticon." And I was like, "Oh, wow, okay." So this is in this timeline, Queen Elizabeth has more pomp and ceremony than the President of the Time Lords. Mm-hmm. But yes, it was fun to see them. I think Mark Platt loves history, especially that older stuff, and kind of Victorian, pre-Victorian era stuff. And he does it really well and has fun with it. And I'm sure if I actually knew my history, there's all sorts of little Easter eggs and comments. I know Drake makes a comment about a sack of potatoes at one point, but
I didn't catch what that. I remember the comment. I just didn't catch what that might have been.
Wasn't he the guy who discovered potatoes?
Oh,
or brought
maybe.
Brought them to Europe, or, as I recall. Wasn't that the thing? Or
gosh,
misremembering that?
See, I guess I'm a Philistine too because I associate potatoes so much with Ireland. Ireland that I was like, oh wait, what are you talking about? They're in The Hobbit, like they're in the Lord of the Rings. Potatoes.
I seem to recall people pinging them for the Middle Earth shouldn't have potatoes if it's supposed to be ancient Europe, but then it's not really ancient Europe. So anyway, there's a topic I'm definitely not qualified to speak on. Is anything related to the Lord of the Rings universe?
So potatoes did originate in what we call today Latin America. So interesting, very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
he brought him back on his second circumnavigation of the globe. So
Yeah. So I got the potato gag, but I got the idea there were lots of other gags like that I
yeah,
wasn't getting because I just am not proper academic. I did love Queen with a gun. That was great. She shows up. It's like boom, a rapid fire thing and shooting these guys. It was just like,
yeah, that was a highlight too.
yeah. Everyone's running around and getting into trouble, and there's monsters, but nobody bothers with a gun until the Queen gets one. Well, shall we get on to the good with the story?
Yes.
All right. Well, what did you love most about it?
I think for me, the thing that captivated my imagination the most was definitely the what if with the tech. I just love the idea of these like privateers, the designs of spaceships being close to what the like a sailing ship, but then fitted for space. I just like the idea of like what if Leonardo had been introduced to something that like changed all. I like the way they changed history, but I also love the setting. I definitely wanted to spend more time in such a setting. I think that was like the biggest thing. Also, just the President Susan thing felt really cool. Like I liked, that was like a moment for sure. And yeah, it was, it was a very well crafted and the sound effects were really good in this too. Like it did feel the atmospherics were really awesome. Yeah, it was good. It was very good.
Yeah,
those things were good, I should say.
Yeah, I like the atmosphere. I think Mark Platt is great at building atmosphere. And whatever, it's often a very kind of somewhat unusual atmosphere that you're not used to in your normal world. And he likes to use kind of artsy terms, and he's definitely a guy with a thesaurus sitting next to his keyboard, and especially a list of architectural terms. But and so that works. I think works well with these kind of nobles running around, being all noble-ish to each other. You can get away with really leaning into the purple prose on that. And so I really enjoyed that, and I like the story. It's just it's a decent little story, and no one's done gemstone zombies before, so that was a new one. We still really haven't done gemstone zombies. So gemstones as a source of evil in Doctor Who. I mean, I guess they've done evil crystals that mind control you, but not like this. Not like evil crystals that infest you. That's something new and different, and much more visceral and less psychic. So yeah, I enjoyed all of those aspects. So, how about the bad?
Well, I know I agree with one of your notes that I know of, which is it was a little long.
Yeah. I do feel like this could have been a 3-parter and not a 4-parter, but, and it would have been fine and probably benefited from tightening up a bit, because there seems like we spend a lot of time with just gemstone zombies wandering around, marauding people and infecting people, and not really the Doctor not doing much, and Susan not doing all that much, and I kind of felt, it feels a little padded. The old Mortality was 1 disc long and was 80 minutes. This is a 2-disc, one of Big Finish's rather rare. Yeah, 130 minutes, one of Big Finish's rather rare 2-disc stories, and I kind of feel like, maybe a 1-discer might have been a little tighter. I will say, if you're trying to capture the feel of Hartnell, then it should be long, and it should have some running around in corridors and getting captured and getting free, because that's how the Hartnell era was.
Right.
To get to the stories would be 6-parters, 7-parters, 8-parter, 10-parter, 12-parter in one particular case. So as far as capturing the tone of what they're kind of gesturing towards, but I don't know if deliberately copying the bad things is an ideal plan. And on a related note, I feel like Susan should have shown up early. Susan should have shown up earlier. I feel like that there was enough. There was a lot more stuff we could have done with President Susan, and by having her show up as late as she did, we didn't get a lot of time to do that. I kind of liked seeing the two Susans interact with each other. I almost wonder if you could have done a version of this where President Susan is on Zero's TARDIS, but she doesn't show up till a little late, doesn't come out immediately. So we think it's just Zero and his TARDIS, and Zero's the problem. But then, oh, wait, there's this other person in there or something.
Also, since TARDIS are all kind of connected to the main Eye of Harmony on Gallifrey, it would have been neat if presidents have a back door to get into any TARDIS in any place and time. Like that'd be an interesting little thing.
It raises questions about other Doctor Who's in the Prime timeline, but there's no particular reason why you couldn't do it in an Unbound. Where you can always just say, well, that's how it is in this universe.
Right.
That's something. There is a presidential TARDIS, even though she shows up with a time ring. There is actually a presidential TARDIS that is, like the presidential limo or something that you get when you're a president.
And then I think the only other thing was that it was such a rich, descriptive kind of thing, especially like there were I like the idea that like other civilizations were spacefaring too, like the Mayans?
Yes, the Mayans.
Yes, the Mayans, yes. So that was very cool. And again, I just like, to me, I guess this is not a bad per se, this is not a knock on the on this story, but me personally, I wanted to see it visualized. Like that was like, so that's not anything to do with the thing. So, with the story, but yeah, it was I guess that's a good. We'll go back to the goods for a second, and it was so descriptive and interesting that I wanted to see it. Live action.
And all of that's riffing heavily on the Aztecs episode of the actual series, where the Doctor emphatically says you can't change history, not one line. Yep. And here he's just, whatever would make things easier for people. Here, you want some medicine? Here, you want, I get the idea he probably offers free rides to the future for people to get cancer cured and stuff.
I feel like a missed opportunity also is that if time gets corrected, it'd be neat if they talked about how there's remnants of it, like how the Aztecs do have depictions of these space-suited alien-looking people, in there. So like the Mayans and so on and so forth, like they all have like these. That I feel like the crystal skulls were discovered down in those.
Well, crystal skulls are pretty much all frauds, but yes, that was where the mythology.
But how interesting if these crystal zombies were somehow, so.
All this conspiracy theory stuff is absolutely fodder for Doctor Who. There are men in black. There were lots of aliens crashing at Roswell because they've done it so many Roswell stories multiple times in Doctor Who, and it now gets a bit confusing when you're like, what is like there were like 6 ships that crashed at Roswell, but there's something crazy like that, and then like 6 different doctors running around dealing with the aftermath of it.
Right.
That's before you get into like quark and stuff. So, which, raises interesting questions about alternate universes. Like, is it just fated that there have to be some aliens that crash in Roswell, and it's going to be Ferengi in one timeline and the Tazoon, I think they're called, in another, and because apparently the Doctor Who timeline is or the Star Trek timeline is the comic book version of it, at least, is an alternate timeline of the Prime Doctor Who timeline. So anyway, which I think nicely brings us to the wibbly wobbly section of things.
Yeah.
I guess the most obvious thing is the Doctor totally screws up the web of time. He's just kind of fixes whatever he wants to fix, and there's no real worry. He also appears to have really good TARDIS control. I mean,
Oh yeah.
because we get the idea he can take people into the future or to other planets and then bring them home again, which is not something the Hartnell Doctor was capable of doing. So the TARDIS appears to be in better shape. We don't actually know if it's the Type 40. What if this was the TARDIS he was about to take, and then Ghost Clara shows up and says, "No, take this one instead," and this is that alternate timeline.
Oh, fascinating.
The one where he
That's
didn't take
interesting,
where Clara didn't show up and he took the wrong TARDIS, and because we don't know for sure, I don't think he ever calls it a Type 40 or anything like that. So he did say it is an old TARDIS due for the breakers. I think that was what he said. But so I don't know if the TARDIS that the Doctor was thinking of, I think, was supposed to be a more modern one. But
that is interesting.
Yeah, the gemstone monsters apparently appear to originate in tunnels in the asteroid belt, though it's not clear if that's where they evolved or if they came from someplace else and invaded the asteroid belt at some point in the distant past. The thing is that asteroid belt, well, in real life, being a planet that never formed due to the gravitational effects of Jupiter being too close to prevent the planet prevent the asteroid belt from congealing up into a planet. In Doctor Who land, there was a fifth planet past Mars. And
speaking of skulls.
Yes, speaking of skulls. And that was the planet where the Fendel came from. A creature that could feed on life itself. Yeah. And like the literal concept of life it would eat. Not just like, oh, well, I ate a steak, and that was made out of a living thing, so I fed on life. No, I mean, they literally would just eat life, the very essence of life itself.
That thing used to scare me as a kid too. I remember seeing the creature, Fendel.
Yes, the Fendel. Image of Fendel was the name of the story. It's a Fourth Doctor TV story. Yeah. It was one of the ones I missed on my first and second go-rounds of watching Tom Baker on PBS. So it was one of those very few classic Who's that I didn't get to see till I was basically an adult in college, as opposed to seeing it as a kid. So it definitely played a bit differently for me than it probably would have if I'd watched it when I was really young. So I did go around carrying about a little bag of salt after that so that I could load it into shotgun shells and shoot it at Cthulhu monsters. But anyway, there was a planet there, and this creature that ate life, the very nature of life itself would be consumed by it. The Time Lords decided that was bad and that it could get out and just eat all life in the universe. And so they destroyed the planet with a time loop. Never been entirely clear how a time loop destroys a planet, but as opposed to just looping it. But apparently somehow they time looped it and it turned into an asteroid belt. And so that's the asteroid belt where they find these jewels. So are these things somehow from the same ecological system that created the Fendel?
I like that.
Maybe?
That's interesting.
I mean, I'm not saying they're related. They could just be two separate life forms that evolved on the same planet, and the gemstones survived the destruction by the Time Lords. But
they have those kind of like powers, like the ability to like turn you into crystal and like kind of the zombification thing. So it'd be interesting if they did evolve on the same planet, and that would explain why they're in the asteroid belt. So that I like that.
Yeah. It was something I never noticed till the most recent listening when I was getting ready for this podcast. I was like, wait a minute, that asteroid belt is a thing in Doctor Who. There's some nasty Cthulhu-esque stuff that lived on that thing. It's very Lovecraftian. Well, did you have any wibbly wobblies to add?
No, I didn't have any for this one, so I'm glad you did.
All right. All right, well, let's take a look at the time lore of the Time Lords here. This was a bit of a stretch, I'll admit, but I thought it would be a good time to talk about some of the aspects of the head of the presidency. In Gallifreyan terms, the presidency refers to a group of people, and the head of the president is what we think of as the Lord President or Lady President of Gallifrey. The title is the Lord High President of the High Council of Gallifrey and all of her dominions, and rules Gallifrey, and he or she, usually he. In fact, almost always he. Like, I think Susan might have been the first female president, according to the novels.
Before Romana, okay.
Even in this timeline here.
Right,
Now,
right.
Obviously, Susan does not become Lady President in the Prime timeline, but in this alternate timeline, she does. And it's worth noting that they try to make her. I can't remember if I mentioned this. The students try to make her president in the Prime timeline, even though she's like way too young at that point to be president. But they just basically want to use a bit of legal loophole and say, hey, you're a descendant of Rassilon. There's this old rule that says the descendants of Rassilon can automatically become president over any president who is not related to Rassilon. And we really hate the guy who's in charge right now. He's like a right Putin type guy, or North Korea or something. So he was bad, or my South Korea. I always get those mixed up. North, the bad one.
Yeah, North is the bad one.
North is the bad one. Anyway, so yes, the idea of making Susan president actually has some very good grounding in the story Birth of a Renegade, by Doctor Who script editor Eric Saward, which was written while he was script editor of the show. So it's I think, or maybe it was shortly before he became script editor, but anyway, he was definitely working with the show by that point. Anyway, so the head of the president has rules Gallifrey and has the obedience of all the colleges or chapters. The head of the presidency is seen as the physical manifestation of the laws of time and an avatar for the power of the Time Lords. He is the holder of the wisdom of Rassilon, preserver of the Matrix, guardian of the legacy of Omega, and probably the keeper of the legacy of Rassilon, though that's there's some debate on that. Defender of the laws of time and protector of Gallifrey. He is sworn to follow the wisdom of Rassilon and the law of Gallifrey, and he carries the title First Time Lord. Like the Chancellor, the President is addressed as Your Excellency. The Presidential Charter, which I'm guessing is part of the Gallifreyan Constitution, lists the power of the President. Technically, the President basically has near absolute power, including the right to order executions. However, the Constitution states the President cannot give orders directly to the Chancellor. So, like, the President can basically order everyone around except the Inner Council. And that acts as a bit of a limitation. And the Inner Council, as far as I can tell, basically just exists to act as a stopgap on the president's power. Should the president start ordering stupid things, then the Inner Council can step in and put the brakes on it and say, no, your horse doesn't get to be a member of the High Council. All the president's instructions go through the Inner Council before being enacted upon. And in an emergency session, the Inner Council can vote to override the president. It has to be unanimous, but they can override the president. And that's the big limit on the president's power. As protector of Gallifrey, the president has direct control over all aspects of Gallifrey's defenses and has access to all of Gallifrey's defense codes. However, the CIA can override him in matters of off-world security. I don't actually think that makes much sense with everything else they've said about the president, that the CIA should be able to override them in
Right.
matters. But it is emphatically and explicitly stated in one of the Gallifrey series audio dramas, so we're stuck with it, even if it kind of feels weird to me, and often seems to be ignored by other writers. But where the CIA wants to do something and they're like, the president says no. So it feels like that was like something somebody did to make the story do what it wanted, and then most of the other writers have kind of ignored it. So.
I never tuned into this before, but it seems so. Doctor Who seems to like, at least the Time Lord seem to think that the democratic form and having things like there's the CIA, at least the writers think the CIA, the president, let's make it more American, interesting.
Yes, that's all down to the greatest Doctor Who scriptwriter who ever lived, Robert Holmes, and his story Deadly Assassin, which we will examine in detail when we get to it. But we're probably going to do a separate episode on each of the 4 parts.
Nice. Okay.
So there's going to it's hard to overstate the importance of the Deadly Assassin to the time lore of the Time Lords. But Robert Holmes was definitely riffing on, despite the fact that it feels a whole lot like the university structure of especially the British university structure or college structure with academics and stuff. Yeah. Despite that, there's definitely a lot of U.S. terminology that's thrown around in there, like the CIA and the president. And there's vague mentions there's occasional mentions of a position of vice president, but it feels like it appears that that's a position that got folded into the position of chancellor. So, the president, in extreme circumstances, has the authority to send temporally reactive update signals back in time to update Gallifreyan security systems, undoing a breach that has already happened. So the president, under certain circumstances in emergencies, is allowed to change history as it is known and violate the first law of time as one of their legal duties, not just some sort of illegal thing that they do on the side and hope that nobody hears about for the good of the many or something, but something they are legally entitled to under some circumstances. There have been security systems that are infected or breached, and they will just send a patch back in time to patch the security system before the breach happened. So that is some serious power there, given all the power the Time Lords have, being able to also break the first law of time under certain circumstances is something that's some serious power there. Now, we don't know a lot of details, like can they use it for other things besides security systems? Not entirely clear. The president is entrusted with many of Gallifrey's most closely guarded secrets, including the Jazzquig records, the War Preceptives, the Cavox Imperatives, and the Oubliette of Eternity. The Black Files hold the most sensitive of the Time Lord's secrets, and they have access to them. The president is the only Time Lord that knows that the Time Lord's overall duty is to enforce the balance of the Guardians of Time, and that the Time Lords are directly answerable to the Guardians. So the majority of Time Lords, much like the Decider Draith, learns all this stuff in a full circle when he finally becomes head Decider, and he looks up, oh my goodness, the secrets. This here is...
That's what happens to the president.
Yeah, the president learns, oh, there's somebody above me. The Guardians of Time are above me, and they can call upon me and say fix things, and I am responsible to adhere to to assist them when needed. Not that they ring up the president.
So you mean like the
often.
Black Guardian and the White Guardian, like the dudes with the birds on their heads?
Yes, the dudes with the birds on the heads. The dudes with the birds on the head get to boss around the dudes with the big collars.
Wow, I only remembered them, but I remember the Black Guardian. I can't remember the White Guardian at the moment, but I guess he had a bird on his head too. I was just assuming.
Yes, they both, at least in the Fifth Doctor era, had birds on their heads.
That's Turlo, right? We're gonna get into Turlo. That's Turlo.
Yes, we'll certainly do some of the stories.
Turlo
from that
is
period.
such a sneaky bugger.
Yeah, and you'll notice. Fourth Doctor becomes president in Invasion of Time. Very next story, he quits, but very next story, the White Guardian looks him up and says, I need you to find the key to time.
Right.
Very next story.
Very cool.
And he's like, oh, the Guardians, I know who you are. But and the Time Lords know a little bit about the Guardians, but they don't realize that they're actually at the top of the command chain. They think the president's at the top of the command chain.
Now, are those the only 2 Guardians, or are there more Guardians?
There are 6 Guardians according to the novels. There's a Guardian. Let's see if I can get them all. I might not be able to. There's a Black Guardian of Chaos, a White Guardian of Order, a Crystal Guardian of Dreams, a Red Guardian of Justice. I think I'd have to look up the other 2. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it.
That's good. But those are the White and the Black Guardian are the only ones we meet on the show,
on
right?
screen.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
Turns out the celestial toy maker, who's apparently showing up in one of Russell T Davies' upcoming stories,
is a Guardian.
Is the Crystal Guardian of Dreams, according to the novels. So we have actually seen a third Guardian.
That's very cool. Very cool.
And the Guardians answer to something called the Grace, which I really haven't had a chance to do much research on, but apparently they've shown up in a bunch of Big Finish audios. The Grace is cropped up in a bunch of Big Finish audios. So the presidency itself consists of 3 Time Lords: the Lord President, often known as the head of the presidency, and 2 attachés who function as secretaries and advisors and are not allowed to serve on the High Council. They're serving as attachés at least. And for some of Gallifrey's history, the presidency included a presidential cat, which was a specifically engineered creature called a calculating animal with a tail that was capable of telling you things that were what things are impossible. So it would act as an advisor to the president to keep them from wasting time on things that were impossible. So once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, it must be the truth. And yes, this is all approved by the BBC. So just in case you're thinking, presidential cat, CAT, calculating animal with a tail.
I like that. I'm going to start referring to my cat as a calculating animal with a tail. That's perfect.
Yes. Sadly, I don't have a presidential cat in arm's reach. This tradition of a presidential cat was discontinued when the Doctor was at the Time Academy, after the Ronnie's giant rats ate one of them. So
that's funny.
The current president cannot be put on trial. So, you're president, you can't be put on trial, apparently just like in the U.S. But they can be impeached by a vote of no confidence from the High Council. Now, not the Inner Council, which is a fairly small group. You need a huge pile of the High Council to actually vote to impeach the president. So still, at least you don't have to go through a 2-step process like there is with the American system, where you have to get the House and the Senate to agree with things. The president can be called to give evidence in a judicial investigation. If they say you have to go to court and answer the lawyer's questions, they have to show up. No wiggling out of that. And ex-presidents appear to retain the right to access the Matrix's predictive abilities, which is a big thing that the presidents have, but it seems like ex-presidents will still have that ability. or write, and they can call for presidential inquiries. So yeah, there's still you carry a little bit of power with you after you're no longer president.
Very similar to our system as well, where you have a lot of influence and you get a security detail, I guess.
Yes. Well, in this particular case, there's some legal things that they can still do, as opposed to just being, the president, the former president, that gives them a certain amount of clout and stuff. And then as of President Flavia, who became president sometime after the 5 Doctors, there had been 412 presidents of Gallifrey. So, which does sort of put in a certain upper and lower time limit to how much time has passed on Gallifrey since the time of Rassilon, who was the first president. Because there's a limit to, that's 412, and admittedly you can serve for multiple terms, but so yes, there's some information about the presidency. That's not even all of it. We haven't gotten into the inauguration or selection process or election process or resignation process. Well, we're going to talk about all that later, but I thought some of these broad presidential stuff applied since we had President Susan running around.
So what happens when Rassilon comes back?
He just immediately becomes president again because of
wreaks his havoc, and then he goes off, and then some.
Yeah, I beg your pardon.
Then he wreaks his havoc, and then he goes off again.
Well, yes. Apparently, all the Doctor has to say is "get out," and he leaves. But I'm not. I still don't entirely. I'm still wrapping my head around what exactly happened there. Yes. They actually talk about it in that the rule of Rassilon states that descendants of Rassilon outrank other people for being president. So presumably the original Rassilon automatically would outrank other people.
Interesting.
So yeah, the original president actually returns, and there's an actual audio drama by Big Finish in the Gallifrey series that actually shows us exactly how Rassilon comes back and takes over again, which we will be covering that story eventually when we get to it, but it'll be a while. Do you have any other presidential observations or questions, or shall we move on?
I like that a lot. I think we can move on though, because I'll have more observations when we come back to the president in future episodes. That's cool.
Okay. So let's look at the TARDIS feature of the week.
Yes. Here we go. There it is.
Well, the control panel for it anyway. But yes.
So today we're talking about the remote parallel mode, which we saw featured in the beginning of the audio drama. Using the tracking monitor control board found on Station 2, the navigation units of 2 TARDISes can be remote paralleled so that wherever one goes, the other will go too. Statenheim signals travel along the time contours of the space-time vortex reach the other time ship.
To reach the other time ship.
Sorry.
Yeah.
If the power ratios are correctly known and balanced, this function can even be used on another TARDIS that is being tracked by the time path indicator. A variation of this function allows an operator who has access to the control crystal of another TARDIS to use his console to enact complete parallel control over the other TARDIS. This allows him to remotely operate almost all the systems of the other TARDIS. Parallel control can even be used to have precise control over a TARDIS equipped with a symbiotic bypass. As with most forms of remote TARDIS navigation, use of the remote control drastically reduces the lifespan of a TARDIS's Zyton 7. Both forms of parallel control can be thwarted by reversing the time vector drive. However, this tears a rift in the vortex and drains the power of both TARDISes to the point where there is not enough power to jumpstart the system.
Which is what we saw in the beginning of the story when Zero manages to hijack the Doctor's TARDIS and try to take him back to Gallifrey, and the Doctor reverses the time vector drive.
I did have a note on that, by the way. It was so clever and funny that the Doctor was like, "Why are you bothering me? Go away! Like, who are you? Who are you? Oh yes, whatever, whatever you say." And then all of a sudden he switches. He's like, "All right." It's really funny.
Yes, one has to wonder. He's clearly been being chased by Zero and running into him off and on for a while, and the Doctor's been loose for 150 years. So one has to wonder, how long has Zero been harassing him?
But it's clever because it was. Then you realize it's the Doctor does these things to distract people so that he has time to do something like reverse the the control there, so that he could go, get free from this this connection.
Yep. So yes, that you can see the tracking monitor control board there on panel 2 of the TARDIS console, with a little bit of Peter Capaldi's hand reaching in, and those controls.
I wondered. Okay.
Yeah. All of the controls on that panel are for basically master override settings of one sort or another, and for just the things that can just override everything in the TARDIS are controlled through those kind of they're not exactly circuit breakers, because they're not switching things on or off so much as locking things into. I think there's one of those switches locks the front the main door so that even a TARDIS key can't unlock it. So. But yes, if you know the right power ratios for the TARDIS, for a TARDIS you're chasing down, you can use parallel control to bring it to heel.
It sounds a lot like the to go back to referencing Star Trek, the device they use in, the function they use in Star Trek 2 to disable the shield
prefix code.
The prefix code. Thank you.
Yes. I suppose the prefix code is a little bit more like those control crystals, only the control crystal is a physical thing. But yes, if you go into the Dai's TARDIS and pull out their control crystal and plug it into your TARDIS, then you can do whatever you want with their TARDIS remotely. And yeah, that's basically a code that it gives you the codes, a physical password key. But yes, so yeah, that's a very similar thing there. The power ratio trick appears to be a little bit more, not exactly a tractor beam, but something, I don't know, more like knowing the shield frequency or something, I guess might be a better comparison for that. But yes, they're very similar idea. And in fact, I wonder if the writer Mark Platt was actually thinking of Star Trek II when he had Zero commandeer the Doctor's TARDIS remotely. But so yeah, that's remote parallel mode.
That was a cool feature and a neat way to open the drama. It was cool.
Yep. So I guess we should wrap things up here.
Hi, Captain.
All right. Well, if you're tired of waiting and listening to all the ums and ahs I make while I dispense the secrets of the Time Lords, you can check out allthingstimelord.com for the unabridged collection of information on all of these secrets. And it also has a link to my TARDIS technical manual, or TARDIS technical index PDF, so that you can look at all the TARDIS features, though I'll admit the PDF's a little out of date, but so Sohail, you have some stuff out there as well that listeners should be checking out.
Yes, check out Starfleet Boy. You just Google Starfleet Boy, but I'm most active on Twitter and, as the 11th Doctor would say, Twitter. Twitter and YouTube.
All right. Well, let's take a look at the time scanner and see what's happening next week.
All right, here we go.
Trying to tune it in. Let me apply the sonic screwdriver a little bit here. And what do we got? Next time we are doing The Stolen TARDIS.
Woohoo!
A Tale of the Time Lords.
Excellent.
Okay, this is going to be our first comic.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited.
Yes, the law.
I haven't read a comic book properly since. Oh no, actually, I have been reading a comic book properly. I put it down, but it's more of a graphic novel. But our
somebody's
friends
going to have to explain the difference between those for me. But
it's a bunch of comic books that were a series put into one big comic book, so they call it a graphic novel. So like they put all the issues that were released into one big book, it's then known as a graphic novel, apparently.
Okay. Not a comic novel. So
but it should be a comic novel, I think.
I mean, I'm not going to tell comic book fans how they should do their stuff. I am definitely, I don't do a lot about comics, and as I've said in a previous podcast, I don't know a lot, but this is definitely a comic I think that we need to cover, The Stolen TARDIS, and
yes.
That was published originally in, well, I'll get into that later, but it was it's a Marvel comic published by UK Marvel. So,
who has the comic book currently? Is it still Marvel here?
I think it's IDW has it at the rights to Doctor Who comics at the moment.
That's interesting. IDW's got a lot of interesting sci-fi things. They've got Star Trek 2, if I'm not mistaken. So
yeah, that's how they were able to do that Doctor Who Star Trek crossover.
Yeah.
Apparently, they were gearing up to do an Aliens crossover with Doctor Who. But
that would have been fun.
Once Paramount bought Fox, they were like, "No, we want our Aliens back. We have Marvel to make Aliens comics. So, we do not need your weird IDW Aliens comics." So that was the end of that, which is a shame because I think Aliens versus Doctor Who would be amazing.
I agree.
All right. Well, we will see you all in later in this time and relative dimension in space.
Folks, please don't forget to subscribe. It'll help us out if you're watching this on YouTube, and smash the like button.